6:03, get started now. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming again. It's been week after week or every other week. Just before I forget, our next session will be in 3 weeks, since 2 weeks from now is the second days of Pesach. So the next section will be in 3 weeks. And Tel Aviv Diary will not be coming out, obviously, on next Sunday. It'll be out again probably next Monday, I guess. Maybe a little bit less news during next week, maybe, although it's hard to say. Anyway, so where do we stand right now? Well, right now, I assume that Prime Minister Netanyahu's plane, Israel's Air Force One, so to speak, or Kanaf Tzion, is now flying over the Atlantic. It's gotten past the danger zone. What's the danger zone? The danger zone is an area where if the plane had to make an emergency landing, Netanyahu would be arrested. So he had to find a maslul, a path out of Europe, from Hungary to the United States that limited the number of places they'd have to stop if an emergency landing. So in any case, by now it's over the Atlantic. He's heading to see President Trump, who he's going to see tomorrow in a surprise meeting. That meeting came about, it would seem, and I say it would seem because I'm not sure we're getting all the information, but according to the information that we've gotten, on Thursday, Prime Minister Netanyahu, together with the president of Hungary, or Viktor Orban, Prime Minister, made a joint call to President Trump to discuss how Hungary was pulling out of the ICC. That's the international court. The major reason is it's become political. It was considered a major thing that he did for Israel because, as you all know, the court has indicted Netanyahu and Gallant, the former defense minister, and called for their international arrests. So Hungary, besides for saying they wouldn't arrest him, officially is pulling out of the ICC, something the United States supports, because the United States isn't a signature to the ICC, because it never believed in the ICC. It's a whole other story we could get into at some point. But in any case, so they called Trump together theoretically. Theoretically, in the course of that conversation, Prime Minister Netanyahu brought up the issue of the tariffs on Israeli goods and sort of asked Trump to do something about it. I'm not sure what. And Trump said, well, you know what? Why don't you come here and talk to me about it? And so Netanyahu sort of thought at the time, well, that was like one of these open invitations. Come talk to me sometime about it, maybe sooner rather than later. Israel then tried to get involved in actually setting a date. It initially wanted a date either Chol Hamoed Pesach, in other words, next week, or after Pesach altogether. The White House said, no, 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 we would like it immediately. And so the meeting is on Monday, tomorrow. So Netanyahu had to get a approval from the court not to attend his trial as he's supposed to be on Tuesday, got a delay until Wednesday, which limits his ability to stay in Washington. And he's heading to Washington right now to meet with Trump. Now, is this meeting about the tariffs? There's some people who say that Trump is looking for an easy win. See, he brings his friend and they make a deal on the tariffs, and he can say, see what I can do in terms of tariffs, etc. Maybe, although it's not at all clear to me what in the world Israel could possibly offer the United States in terms of trade. After all, Israel has zero tariffs. It had minuscule tariffs on a few agricultural goods before that were eliminated 2 days before, or a day before Trump's Independence Day speech. And so Israel doesn't have any tariffs. Does it have non-tariff barriers? Everybody has some non-tariff barriers. It's working to eliminate those non-tariff barriers. I don't think any of them have any effect on products that the United States might be selling to Israel. I mean, Israel buys all of its jets. El Al is a Boeing-only company. Part of that reason is to keep the Americans happy. And so all of El Al's fleet is Boeing. I mean, also an advantage of having only one airline instead of one aircraft, or one type of aircraft instead of having both Airbus and Boeing in terms of parts and all those other things. Obviously, it buys 80% of its military supplies from the United States, except for the stuff that it makes itself and a few minor things that are made in various parts of the world. I can't see Israel in any which way agreeing at this point not to produce its own products. That that would be catastrophic after what we learned during this war, that we have to be producing our own, whatever we can, we need to be producing ourselves. All we can say is we'll export less. I mean, that's possible, but that's like, cutting off our nose to spite our face. We're going to cut out our exports to the United States. Luckily, Israel is fairly balanced. Its exports are, while the United States is its biggest customer, it's pretty evenly divided between North America, Europe, and Asia. And so hopefully if we lose some bit of the US market, we can make up for it in Europe, we can make up for it in Asia. I don't know. Right now, the tariffs are only on goods and not on services, which, by the way, all his calculations were on goods only, but we'll leave that part aside. And so they don't affect probably 60 to 70% of Israel's exports to the United States, which are basically software services. An Israeli company develops a software product, it's exported and sold in the United States. It's all very unclear, to be quite honest with you, and that's why this whole, just as a total side, the whole idea of the U.S. trade deficit is a bit of a misnomer in and of itself. Why do I say that? Because yes, the United States runs a deficit in goods and it runs a surplus in services, but its services surplus is probably understated to a very, very large degree because American companies often make profit centers overseas for all sorts of tax reasons, etc. And so it's not considered imports. So when Facebook is selling advertising in Israel, or for that matter, Facebook is selling advertising in parts of Europe or Africa, wherever it is, in some cases, it's considered an American export, but in many cases, it never appears as an American export. And the same goes for Google services and cloud services and go down across the board to all the high-tech companies. Keep in mind, and this is a thing that I always say, and I didn't want this to become about tariffs, so let's just make this one last comment. If the United States is being ripped off all these years, how is it that American companies are the richest companies in the world? And how is it that Americans, the richest people in the world, are Americans? Interesting question to ask next time you hear how the United States is being ripped off. That's a whole other story, and I don't want to get into it. Some of you saw my I-24 interview the other day. I think I covered some of it. Anyway, so the question is, if he's not going to be discussing trade and he's not discussing tariffs, what is Netanyahu going to be talking to Trump about, and why does Trump want to see him? My best guess, and it's purely a guess, is we're talking about Iran. The United States has, for the first time, put a credible threat on the table. It has moved enough bombers into the area. It has just deployed yesterday a second THAAD system to help defend Israel from the counterstrike that Iran would bring about if the United States and Israel, or Israel with United States support, attack the Iranian nuclear program. So my guess is he wants to talk about Iran. Now, it could be one of two things. Obviously, it could be for planning an attack. I don't think so. I think the more likely situation is the Ayatollahs are going to blink and agree to negotiations. Will those be good negotiations? Will they end up with an agreement that we will like? Will we be back to the same agreement we had that the United States and Israel walked away from, or a worse agreement because we're further down the line? Quite possibly. But in the meantime, I suspect that the Iranians will agree to negotiate. They're already saying they'll agree to indirect talks. The difference between indirect and direct talks is really a question of an hotel room. So I think the Iranians are going to agree to negotiate, and he wants to make sure that Netanyahu doesn't blow up those negotiations, because Trump does not want a war with the Iranians, because better for worse, he does not want wars. And frankly, I don't think we should want wars either after a year and a half, but that's a different story altogether. So that is why I think, and again, I don't know, and we may not know on Tuesday after the meeting either, that's what's going to be discussed. On his departure from Budapest, he sort of mentioned as an afterthought, they're also going to discuss the hostages. That's the saddest part of all of this. And the saddest part of what's going on here in Israel at the moment is the fact that the hostages do not seem to be anybody's highest no, I should rephrase that. Are not the government's highest priority. They're obviously the families of the hostages' priority. They're the family of most Israelis. It's the highest priority. The majority of Israelis, the overwhelming majority, 70% of Israelis, repeatedly in poll after poll say they believe in ending the war to get back the hostages. But the 20% that don't are the base of Netanyahu or the base of support. And Netanyahu is not willing to lose that support. And as a result, the war continues or resumes, however you want to look at it. And right now it's resumed. Um, and no one really understands to what end. I mean, the view is the army says we're going to put additional pressure, and we're putting pressure. I'm sure we're putting pressure on Hamas. I'm sure it's not easy, but if they didn't break after we had 3 times as many troops in Gaza last time, is there any real reason to think they're going to break this time? Number two, we've cut off all aid into Gaza. Theoretically, that could pressure them, but do we really think the world is going to let us starve them out? The Hamas people have food and water. The people who don't are the regular Gazans. We can talk about what they deserve or don't deserve, and if this was a month after October 7th, possibly we could get away with much more than I think we can get away with at this point in the war. I have my own moral questions about what we're doing. I don't know. Let's put it this way. I believe, unfortunately, civilians die in a war. In necessary wars, civilians die, and it's a terrible thing and it's a tragedy. But when the war is unnecessary or is not going to gain anything, then every civilian death, whether it's our enemies, quote unquote, or whoever, is a tragedy, and it's something we should avoid, and it shouldn't be happening. And unfortunately, it is happening at this point. Here in Israel, we do not see those images, or hardly ever see those images, which is a problem in and of itself. The fact that the Israeli public only sees part of what's going on has been a problem throughout the war, in my opinion. And certainly earlier in the war, there was so much pain in this country. I don't think we have the ability to absorb anyone else's pain. I'm not saying the pain has gone away. I'm not saying that we easily can absorb other people's pain or be sympathetic to other people's pain at this point. But I think it's a problem, the fact that we do not see any of the images, the result of what we do in Gaza. And I think that's a problem. And I don't have any easy solutions to that at the moment. So I don't know where it's going to go in terms of this ongoing this return to Gaza. It's been somewhat limited because, as I've written, the army is reluctant to call too many reservists to fight in Gaza. They're afraid that too many of them are going to refuse to serve, either because they've served too much, just simply exhaustion, inability, businesses going under, marriages frayed, etc., and or political objection to the fact that majority of this country opposes going back into Gaza and fighting again because no one sees what the point is going to be. What are we going to do different now than we've done last time? And so far, we've seen nothing different. The only thing poo-poo is so far the casualties have been remarkably low or non-existent. But that won't continue forever, obviously, unfortunately. So I don't know. I don't know where we're going, where we continue going in terms of Gaza at this point. All I know is that 59 hostages, they're still there. 24 of them are probably alive, or they were alive a week and a half ago. Are they all still alive now? We don't even know. Are we going to end up killing a few of our own hostages? I think it's based on past experience. The answer is probably. And what will we have accomplished? I don't know. And very difficult. I'm glad. I see the writing of the diary over the year and a half of the war as, partly obviously just informative, but partly also in terms of Hasbara, in terms of getting Israel's message out there. Israel's message right now, forget how we're delivering it, is muddled. It's a muddled message that is not clear what the message we're trying to get out. Free our hostages. Okay, we all agree we want to free our hostages, but we're the ones who didn't fulfill the agreement that we signed. So it's really very difficult. In the meantime, on our other fronts, in Lebanon, I think twice today we've killed Hezbollah operatives in South Lebanon. No one has been complaining about that because they're not supposed to be there. On the terms of the agreement, all the Hezbollah fighters were supposed to be north of the Litani River and not supposed to be in southern Lebanon, but they are. The Lebanese army is not successful in imposing the agreement that was agreed to. And so whenever we have to, we do it ourselves. I don't think that's a bad thing. I do think and I wrote about this the other day, I think some innovative and forward-thinking diplomacy would be a good idea at this point, but we don't have any diplomats in our government, so it's hard to have interesting diplomacy when you have very limited diplomats to try to engage in that diplomacy. Same with Syria. We keep on using force in order to enforce our red lines, and we've moved ourselves into Syria fairly deeply. It just seems to me that there's some diplomatic achievements that can be made. We're concerned about the Turks. We're concerned about the Turks creating bases and operating in Syria. We've made it clear that we have red lines when it comes to that. And we're enforcing our red lines with bullets or bombs, so to speak. So again, I sometimes think we could accomplish more with diplomacy, but maybe not. Which turns to our domestic situation at this point. On Tuesday, there's supposed to be a hearing in the Supreme Court on whether Prime Minister Netanyahu can fire the head of the Shin Bet. Today, Friday, the Attorney General wrote that she should not be able to because the Shin Bet is currently investigating whether the people in his office were working for the Qataris, and he shouldn't be able to fire the head of the Shin Bet while there is an investigation going on into what's going on in his office. He himself wrote a letter that in any other time in our history would have been a blockbuster. He said the reason Netanyahu has quote unquote lost faith in him was for two reasons. Number one, more recently, he was asked by Netanyahu to write a letter stating that the security concerns were so great that he could not stand trial and his trial needs to be postponed. The head of the Shin Bet refused to write that letter. And ever since then, quote unquote, Netanyahu has lost faith in him. Number two, he wrote that Netanyahu asked him to do things that he shouldn't do. In other words, he should use the power of the Shin Bet to follow, learn about, etc., some of the people in the opposition to the judicial reform, in the opposition to the war, and he refused to do that. We've heard similar cases from former heads of the Shin Bet who have hinted to the same thing happened to occur during their terms. All of them claim to have said no to Netanyahu the same way that Ronan Bar did, but he keeps on asking and probably gets some of them to do it. So that's should have been, like any other time, this country would have been in a turmoil just over that letter. Now it's just been normalized in the long list of insane things that have been happening. Insane things include the story of Qatargate that continues to unfold. What we know at this point for sure is that at least two of the people in Netanyahu's office received money from the Qataris. What they did for that money, how much, etc. Was it two-way street? Was it just the Qatars influencing us, or was it us giving information to them? We do not know yet, but quite clearly, two of the key people in Netanyahu's office were receiving either their salaries or additional money from the Qataris. That's a fact. The rest is a little bit up to the furtherance of the investigation. Again, under normal world circumstances, I mean, if you look back at the Chancellor of Germany in the 60s, very popular, I forgot his name, was extremely popular. It turned out that someone in his office was a spy. He resigned, apologized and resigned. The same thing happened in Great Britain. This happened in all sorts of places in the world. We don't even have, we don't even have an apology or a question or a statement by the prime minister. I need to get to the bottom of this terrible thing. No, it's all been an attack on the security services for bringing this up. And so it's very strange times in that way. Most people agree that this is a terrible situation, but nothing can be done about it, to be quite honest with you. So even if there's proof that there were additional issues that Netanyahu claimed when he was interrogated, when he was questioned, excuse me, wasn't interrogated, he was questioned, that he knew nothing about it. Well, again, there are two possibilities. If you know nothing about it, you don't know what's going on in your own office, that's a problem. Or if you're lying and you did know about it, that's a problem. Either way, it's a problem. And either way, under normal circumstances, he should just resign over something like this. But come on, he didn't resign over October 7th. He's not responsible for anything. I can mention the fact that the commission looking into the submarines and the frigates that were bought from Germany and that whole issue issued a warning to Netanyahu, a warning letter before it's a whole process, but the first step was a warning letter. And in the warning letter, it said that he endangered the security and safety of the state of Israel by what he did in that story. He was also one of the people mentioned of not doing his job when it came down to the fires, excuse me, that took place in Meron. I think also all the way going back to the fires in the Carmel. I'm not sure he allowed for an investigation, but certainly the tragedy in Meron, he was considered partially responsible, but he didn't take any responsibility. So at the moment, elections are a year and a half away. That's quite a long time. Quite a lot of terrible things could happen during that period of time. Hopefully, some of the hostages will come back by then. Hopefully, some of them soon. It's really hard to believe we're heading into a second Passover, and there's um, still hostages in Gaza, and that's something that's really, really, nearly impossible to imagine at this point. Um, that's I think covered. I mean, okay, no, two other small matters. Number one, the West Bank. There were two incidents that were uncovered in the last week of soldiers doing things they shouldn't to Palestinians in Palestinian refugee camps and villages. In these two cases, as opposed to what's been going on for the last 2 years, there was an immediate investigation. In the first case, the investigation was concluded quickly, and two of the soldiers were sent to jail. One of the commanders was relieved of his command, and additional higher ups received reprimands in their files. The second case, I don't think that's been concluded yet, but in both cases, action was taken relatively swiftly. Someone asked me in a comment, it's related sort of to the question of what about the story of the ambulances that were fired upon and the people killed in those ambulances. Obviously, the initial reports that Israel gave were wrong. Clearly, some of them people were shot with the ambulances had their lights on. There is supposed to be a final report given to the chief of staff tonight, and at which point it will hopefully be made public. We've had a problem throughout this war of firing first and asking questions later. That's how soldiers managed to kill our own hostages. That's how there have been so many incidents where we've shot our own troops. And so that's been an ongoing problem in this whole war. Not the discipline has never been great in the Israeli army and has gotten worse as the war has gone on. The longer war goes on, the more people are, I won't say tired, but tired is part of it, and anything goes and everything else relating to that. And that results in enough mistakes on our side and mistakes that tend to be fatal. And I would say killing by design or not by design of innocence. And that also happens. And, something has also happened in this country that I can't put my finger on exactly. And this was even before the war. Before the war, I was seeing so much more hatred of Arabs than I had ever seen before. And I tried to put my finger on why. In other words, um, I understood after the Second Intifada why there was that hatred that existed afterwards. If you were a young person who saw your friend being blown up, God forbid, on the bus, or you were afraid to go anywhere near a bus because of being blown up, and there were many, 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 many cases that I just written about in my work that I'm working on this book, and so many cases. And so afterwards, I understand why at that point there was a rise, and why, friends of mine who have kids who came to age during that period of time, said how some of them became, ended up being more right wing than the parents did, at least for a period of time. There was a reason for it. But why during the years right before this war, why that happened, why Ben-Gvir got the support that he got before the war, I'm not talking about after the war, I'm talking about before the war, is something that I don't quite understand. And I haven't been able to fully understand why that hatred has managed to grow. The sina, the hate of the other, the acher, is something that's very real amongst some subset of the population, and not a subset we can ignore. And we can't keep on ignoring that subset. And it's not limited only to settlers or settler kids or whatever it is, because Ben-Gvir's support is bigger than that. I'm not saying that all of Ben-Gvir supporters are haters, but to some extent, a lot of them are. And we need to understand what's happened in our society that let that happen. What happened to our educational system that let that happen? These are serious questions that we don't even ask ourselves, or we're afraid to ask. And certainly our politicians are afraid to ask those questions. And they're deep questions, and they're questions of, we have a Jewish state. Why do we have a Jewish state besides our own needs to maintain our freedom, our independence? But to what end? What's our moral basis? How do we act like we deserve this state? And those are things that worry me at times, and we'll have to see as times go forward how we manage to go forth with that. Any rate, I think we've reached the halfway point, so I'll open up for questions. Please ask questions. I'll do my best to answer. Okay. Steve Waldman.
Hi. I've mentioned this a bit in the past about the complete polarization between the right and the left. Um, particularly the media, JNS, the people you see on YouTube, Caroline Glick, who had her own station, but she's now working under Netanyahu's
Yeah.
office. I don't know whether you saw Netanyahu being interviewed by Gadi Taub, another a very right winger. He's converted Mike Duran, his equivalent in the States, to believe that everything that Netanyahu says is right. But in this, did you actually see this interview, or if
I
anybody
did
else
see
saw
the
the
interview.
interview?
No,
In this interview,
it's hard for me to watch Netanyahu's interviews these days, but
yeah. Well,
he
this was
doesn't give any
unusual.
he doesn't give any real interviews, because he doesn't give an interview with anyone who would possibly ask him a difficult question. So
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, this was an hour-long monologue. Gadi Taub said that he was given 2 hours' notice to turn up at wherever it was that Netanyahu wanted to see him. It was not Ilana, Diane, and Uvda. It was he knew that Gadi Taub worships him. Now, Gadi Taub is an intelligent person, but I'm afraid it is one view. Now that they keep talking about that the left being in control of the media, a bit like they said the Conservatives were in control of the media in the United Kingdom, and it actually leaves you confused because on the one hand, you're going to get one statement from those who support Netanyahu, and it's diametrically opposed. I mean, I don't read Haaretz, but it's diametrically opposed from what a lot of the media is saying, and it's very confusing.
okay, so let's try to take that apart in two different ways. First of all, there is no real left in Israel. What is left? Traditional left doesn't exist, in the sense that there are very few people. The left was, let's give up territory and have a Palestinian state, next to us next week. I'm exaggerating, obviously. There's no one like that left in this country. Even what's considered the far left of the Zionists don't believe that at this point. So I don't think, that doesn't exist. What exists is crazy right-wing media A normal media. I'm sorry, there's normal media and there's crazy right-wing media. The normal media, I watch a combination of Channel 12, Channel 13, once in a while, I put on 14. Um, all that's there is mostly lies, mostly non-facts. It's like watching to Fox. Fox 2 is the same thing. Um, you know, I sometimes I have this discussion with, as you all know, if you see, sometimes I appear every week on a radio show in the United States and in Florida with the Bob Harden show. And Bob was a normal Republican. He supported Rubio before, and then became a Trump supporter sometime around when Trump ran the first time after Rubio lost. And now he's, been all on. It's a man who used to be a vice president of American Express, educated man, smart guy. We can talk about lots of foreign affairs things in a smart way. However, the information he gets, I listen to him sometimes, and his information is often um, based on Russian propaganda. When he talks about Ukraine, all I'm hearing is RT's propaganda. And I say, Bob, I don't care. I don't expect you to read the New York Times. I don't expect you to read the Washington Post or, New Republic or read the Wall Street Journal. Read the Wall Street Journal. Get your information on the Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal. I may not agree with his editorials all the time, although sometimes I do. But the Wall Street Journal news is news. They have fact checkers. Even in Newsweek, which I wrote for so many years, I had my column, which once in a while will still appear, is an opinion column, and my editor, or previous editor, I should say, would say, "Well, can you prove that fact? What's your sources?" This is an opinion column, for God's sakes. So real publications do that. Channel 14 in Israel does not do that. Carolyn Glick is off from the stratosphere somewhere. Some of her views I find, it's hard to even understand where she comes by some of those views. But so yes, there is this far right media in Israel, and they're doing all they can to support 14. And a lot of people listen to 14, and that's the way they get their news from. And then they believe everything they say. The same way people listen to Newsmax and Epic News and Fox News, and they don't hear anything else. So therein lies the biggest problem. And not to talking about social media that's there are obvious groups of people that you go in your own silo and all you hear is your own information, and that of course makes it worse. You only hear from your own people who believe in what you believe in. I try to listen to other people all the time. It's hard. It's difficult. Um, but name me the good things this government's been doing. I mean, I can't come with that too many. Brian Ratner.
Hi. Um, what's quite it may not be a big story in Israel, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but in the UK, the expulsion of the two Labour MPs has not gone down well. I just wonder what your thoughts are about the wisdom of that action. Whether I suspect it's to do with that they're because isn't there this law about um, people who support BDS not being welcome? I suspect these later MPs are supporters of BDS. Whatever you think of that. So, what's the wisdom though? Because it's raising a bit of a political dust storm in the UK.
Between wisdom and the old saying, it's better to be smart than right. So I would say they're probably right not letting these people in, but it's not smart. And it goes down to I had this argument way back when. I don't know if anyone remembers when members of the squad wanted to come to Israel on a visit. And that was how many years ago was that? That was probably 6 years ago. I don't remember exactly when it was. I remember having a debate on TV about that. And I thought it was a good idea to let them in because better know put your enemy here. Um, Maybe you'll have a chance of affecting them. Probably not, but maybe a slight bit, as opposed to creating a storm by not letting them in. Can they do more harm when they come here? I don't see how they're going to do more harm. It'd be a non-story if they were let in, right? We wouldn't even know their names. They're backbenchers in the government, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
That's right.
Um, so we wouldn't even know their names. Who knows the names of the backbenchers in the British Parliament? Um, so. Yeah, I think it's stupid. I think it's very stupid. I think it makes a good headlines here. Shows, our foreign minister, whoever it is on top of things. I think it's a mistake. I think you bring you let your enemies in. You try to influence them. You're not going to convert them into lovers of Zion. You're not going to get them into lovers of Israel. But maybe if you work at it really hard, instead of hating us on a scale of, from 1 to 10, they hate us at an 8 or a 9. Maybe we can drop it down to a 6 or 7. Maybe. I don't know. But it's worth a try. You're certainly not going to do it by keeping them away. So that's my opinion. Like I said, I'm a strong believer in being smart and not right. This government continuously chooses to be quote unquote what they consider right and never what's smart. And what's smart is more important in my opinion.
Thank
Personally.
you. I agree with you.
Anyone else? Come on, folks. Got to be a few more questions. Wait, we got a hand up there. Claude, go ahead.
Transportation on Shabbat,
Okay.
trains, buses, so forth.
Okay.
Does
So
that
that's
does that get discussed ever?
no. There's the status quo which has existed since the establishment of the state, more or less, which was status quo in cities which were mixed. So Haifa has public transportation, the rest of the country doesn't. The train's not. However, Tel Aviv has put in its own busing system on Shabbat. It's free, and it goes from Tel Aviv, and there are lines that go to Kfar Saba and Ra'anana and Ramat HaSharon and Bat Yam and a whole bunch of different places. There's a whole system of buses that goes in and out of Tel Aviv on Shabbat. So to give people the ability to come in on Shabbat, get out on Shabbat, don't have, Tel Aviv is the one place that works really hard to try to dissuade cars. So someone had an article the other day, and this is sort of related, not related, to the fact that Tel Aviv is the only city in the metropolitan area that has put a lot of time and money into bike lanes everywhere. So you can get around almost all of Tel Aviv on a bike lane. So on a bicycle or on a scooter, you don't need you don't need a car. You can get almost anywhere in Tel Aviv in 20 minutes on a scooter, 25 minutes without traveling in the street. So Tel Aviv really tries to decrease the number of cars that come into the city, and the same way for Shabbat they've done the same. Overall, revisiting the whole question of transportation on Shabbat, we can't revisit the question of getting Haredim into the army. Look, we have a subway. We're going to build a subway system. The subway system is not going to run on Shabbat. I can remember years ago having a discussion with rabbis whether if you bought your token in advance, whether you could go on the New York City subway. After all, it doesn't go for you.
Like
It's
an
going to go in
elevator.
any case. It doesn't stop for you. It's going to go in any case. And if you have a token which isn't really money, why can't you? And today it's different. We won't get into the history of using iPhones and getting all that sort of stuff. But why not be able to go on the subway? And rabbis actually thought it was possible with them. And then of course, the thing that ended any discussion, Marat Ayin, it doesn't look right, not Shabbosdik. So there was no one agreed to something like that. But no one's willing to revisit these basic issues, even though people would like to.
So
Lisa,
what happens when foreigners come in on Saturday or
what
Friday
happens? They
night?
have to take a cab.
No train.
They have to take a cab. They used to have to. Train's new. They have to take a cab. That's
Okay,
the reality.
thank you.
So what wasn't a train until very recently, Lisa.
Okay, I was just going to ask a general question. When you have all, at the end of your daily reports, you have all this IT, what's going on in IT, and when you show the pictures, it's usually men and not women. What's the status of women in Israel, or or IT in general? I mean, I never see pictures, or very rarely. Maybe there's one in a group of five.
Okay, so the reality is that is the case that in terms of let's step back. A very high percentage of the people who start companies in this country in IT and everything else come out of the advanced military units the deal in that, what's called Shmona Matayim, the 8200, and there are a couple of other very select units where a great majority of the people, if you look at all the startups in the country, you'll find that 70% of them probably were started by people who came out of 8200, 81, and a bunch of other little units. Those units are overwhelmingly male. They're overwhelmingly male, primarily because they take people who have some sort of background in computers before the army. There's someone who studied computers. They take people who've done 5 units of computer science, have those expertise, etc. They have worked very hard in the last 8 years, and I can say this based on personal observation. They've worked very hard to try to increase the number of women in those units. They have been slightly successful. They've created clubs and special classes for women in schools to try to get them interested. But stereotypes are still stereotypes. You know, the stereotype of the geek in high school versus the woman who's into other things is very real. It's not, it's very hard to change that. So the reality is the units of those kind are probably at least 80% still male. They used to be 95%. Now we're down to probably about 80%, and I don't know the exact statistics. That's just a gut look from my side. So there are more women, but it's a problem. But some ways it's but there are more women lawyers in Israel than there are men lawyers. More women graduate law school in Israel than men. Same in the United States, by the way, at this point. So, but there's still more males finishing engineering school if there are any Americans still in the engineering school in the United States, not all foreign. But that's a reality. Lynn.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. What do you know of a news organization called TRNN, the Real News Network, coming out of Baltimore in USA? There was a piece on YouTube that my son in the UK had happened upon, which was titled "The Israeli Illegal Land Theft." And it was, I think that it headed Channel 4 Documents. And it was absolutely it was quite disgusting. But I just, I mean, my son was appalled, and I told him not to believe a word, but it said also that Netanyahu was in Tulkarm, which made me think, would he go to Tulkarm? What reason would he be in Tulkarm? Anyway, just wondered if you'd ever heard of them.
I've never heard of TRNN. He wasn't Tulkarm, by the way. He went for briefly, he showed up there for a brief filming of a statement when the Israeli troops had gone into Tulkarm. He didn't actually go into downtown Tulkarm, but he went to the outskirts where there were some Israeli troops. So that part is true. Look, I don't know what was on that broadcast. You need to weigh, you have to weigh everything in some sort of proportion. I am quite sure we're doing things that I would be embarrassed that we're doing in the West Bank. I was embarrassed what we did in Gaza when I served in Gaza in 1981. An occupation is a terrible thing. An occupation that's gone on for 50 years is an even worse thing. The only problem is no one has come up with a solution of how we get out of this occupation and still maintain our security. And therein lies the problem. It'd be very nice if we could have a magic wand and we could have peace with the Palestinians, and they would agree to live piece by piece, peacefully, side by side with us, in a two-state solution. To get some compensation for the refugees and all that. But they turned that down every time over history. So it's terrible we're still occupying them. I also don't have a solution how we can stop occupying them and maintain our security. How can we stop occupying parts of the West Bank and make sure that rockets don't land on Ben Gurion Airport, which is, depending on which places, 6 kilometers, 10 kilometers from parts of the West Bank. very close by, mortar range practically. So how do we do that? And as soon as someone can come up with a solution to that, I'm all in favor, but it's not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. I certainly don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. So we do terrible things, and we should be doing less terrible things. It goes back to what I said about education and how we react to Arabs or Palestinians, and how we look upon the other generally. Look at America. Look what's going on in America when it comes to the other, whoever that other is right now, right? And look in Europe and look all over the world. The other is something terrible. And, you know, the other, whoever that other may be, is a human being just like you and me. We need to find ways to bridge that gap. I don't believe we can find ways to live to bring about peace, but we need to understand that that other is a human being. And we need to find ways of relating to the other, be they an illegal immigrant in the United States, be they a refugee in Europe, be they a Jew looking for refuge somewhere else. We need to find ways to deal with the other in a better way. Okay, someone else is raising their hand. Mark Feldman.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I'm wondering how you view the recent anti-Hamas uprisings in Gaza and what kind of impact do you think they'll make?
Okay, so first of all, it's positive. Let's start with that. The fact that there is anti-Hamas uprisings in Gaza, it's positive. It's taken a long time. They seem to be coming back. There were again anti-Hamas demonstrations again today. We do not know. Hamas at first managed to put them down, but they may be wider than Hamas realizes. To understand the power of demonstrations, we've seen many times where things have suddenly switched on a dime. Could Hamas lose total control in a minute? Maybe. It's a possibility. Obviously, Gazans have had enough. And I think the average Gazan is saying, I don't know, that I won't say they want to live in peace forever, but right now they want peace for the next 10 years. They want to try to rebuild whatever lives they can. They want the Israelis out of there. I think it's a good thing. I think there's a chance we can build from that an alternative government in Gaza. On the other hand, they could disappear in a day at the end of a rifle. If the Hamas is willing to kill enough of them, then they might be able to put it down. But it's a good sign. What can I tell you?
Do you think there's any chance that Israel is behind it at all?
No, we're not smart enough to be behind it. I mean, I take that back. Yeah, I'm sure there are some security services that are helping in ways but I don't think we were behind it. I think we would have had a more altogether policy for the day after in Gaza if we were behind this. This would be part of a larger plan, which we certainly don't have at the moment. Alan Krim.
Good morning. Where do we stand with seeing more of the Orthodox who have been drafted participating in the military?
So far, nowheres. Of 16,000 draft notices that went out, we ended up with 281 showing up. Not exactly a large number. So far, it's had a negative impact in the sense that we've gotten less than what we thought we were going to get. It's a real problem. It's a real problem on multiple levels. If at one point it was only a question of, a balance, right? It wasn't fair that they weren't sending their kids and we were sending our kids to fight and die. Now it's a question the army really does need more people. And they're the single largest theoretical group of people who could join the army. I'm not optimistic. I don't really see a good solution. I don't see these rabbis agreeing. They're very, very fearful that once they go into the army, the ultra-Orthodox world is built on the idea that they can separate themselves completely from the secular society. They work very hard at doing that. Once they're in the army, despite all the facts it's going to be in an ultra-Orthodox unit, this and that, there is a certain amount of you're going to interact with the rest of the country and the rest of the army in some ways, and the rabbis don't want that in any which way. They want to keep control. And so I don't see any good and easy solutions to it. I think our manpower solutions will eventually be taken care of by robots, but that's a whole other story. And that'll take another 5 or 10 years. Okay. At this point, I would thank everybody again. See you all in 3 weeks. I'm also hoping that at that point we'll start. I said we'll do something with some sort of podcast. Not sure the details, but we'll have a podcast that'll go with the daily updates, maybe a couple times a week. We'll have to work on that. We'll have to see. Oh, by the way, if you're all on, any feedback relating to these some of the new things that I've put on the update, including these LLM small little podcasts that were created that summarize different studies, or some of these videos of tech. Anyone have anything to say about any of that? Go ahead. You like it? Yochi likes it. Okay. Anyone else? Paul likes it too. Okay. Okay, we'll keep doing it. It's an easy thing to do. So I thank you all. Please give feedback whenever you can. Just drop me a note if you like something, you don't like something. It certainly helps me trying to plan what to do in the future. Okay, thank you all. Have a Chag Sameach.
Thank you now.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks.
Chag Sameach.
Sameach.